they listen radically. And what I mean by that is every word. They notice themes that are coming up. They ask useful questions to open the material, details. They unpack vague references, making sure who he and she is or that thing. And they don't zone out. Most importantly, they are doing what we call a close reading of the details in every client sharing and at every meeting. And in the first sessions, when we ask the client to tell the whole story of them from start to finish, obviously not every minute of their life, but the main outline of what they've lived, we start by asking them, what was the earliest thing that most defined you? And interestingly, there's almost always a direct connection between this earliest thing and the problem behavior they came in with to work on. So for another example, one client came in reporting sudden and inexplicable panic attacks. And her earliest defining thing was that her little sister was bipolar. So as it turned out, her elderly mother had recently been diagnosed with cancer. And my client was terrified that the care for this erratic and volatile sister was now going to fall on her. And that had devoured her entire childhood. So she, was feeling understandable panic, but had not made that connection. Yes, yeah. She came in, obviously throughout her life she was unconsciously or vaguely aware that, oh God, someday I may have to take care of my sister. But when she came in, she was much more consciously focused on the fact that her mother was dying. And she initially thought that might be what the panic was about, but her mother was old. It was a natural kind of end of a life. And she had been independent and self-sufficient for a long time. As I asked her questions a lot around the sister, because that was the earliest, most defining thing, it became clear to both of us in the telling that her sister was her burden, and now it was going to be literally daily a burden for her. The mother had been taking care of the adult sister. So, we listen in a way to relate these earliest things to the presenting problem and keep that earliest thing in mind through the entire listening to their story. Right? And I'm also listening for, what and who might be left out of the story, things we call narrative jumps or ruptures or omissions, just as you might in a movie or a book. In fact, we listen in all sessions, and most particularly, how is the current stuckness related to the core past learnings? And in that first telling, some clients will skip over whole sections of their childhoods or never speak about a particular parent, and there's always a coherent reason why. So to give you another example, one middle-aged client began her story at the age of 20, and that was shortly after her father's death, and she had been very close with her father and had a stormy relationship with her mentally ill mother. So choosing to forget or skip over all that had come before the death felt easier for her. It's not what stood out. The loss of him was what stood out. But ironically, this was keeping her locked in complicated grief about her father because she couldn't remember all the good stuff that she had gotten either. It was not like she had amnesia. She just was not focused on it at all. And when I noticed this out loud, she said, it feels like a totally different person. And she hadn't even felt integrated with that before 20-year-old person. And, so she felt very alone and didn't have all the richness of her father and the relationship she had with him to help her through this healing at all. Mm. I noticed and said, you've said very little about your mother. And she began to talk again about her mother now, in her life in the present. And I said, this is a very underdeveloped character in your story. What about all those years before you were 20? And that's when, she very reluctantly began to sketch in a little bit about what went on in those years and how frightening it was. And it was really the bond with her father that allowed her to feel safe at all. Mm-hmm. So, a good coherent narrative therapist listens and questions radically and transparently toward noticing those missing pieces out loud, and then finding and sharing, themes and meanings that maybe the client hadn't put together yet. And then they can coherently connect these dots back to the presenting problem, which for her was this kind of complicated grief, but also a feeling of being dissociated from herself. She had no foundation underneath this 20-year-old building.